Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening. This is Sarthak, and we are back with another exciting session. So, we have with us today Mr. Ishan Chopra, and we would be talking about the International Mood series, The Last Days of Preparation. Uh, Before we go ahead, some basic housekeeping rules. We are keeping the question and answer session in the end. So if you have any questions, you can shoot it out at the end. We'll allow everyone to put forth their question. In case if we cannot answer your question or because of the time crunch, you can mail it to us and we'll get it answered. Also, if possible, kindly keep your videos on. It's completely discretionary. So, but if you can try and keep your videos on, then it's good. Okay, so let's start with the session. Hi, Ishan. Welcome to the ASTM Legal webinar.
Thank you,
So
Sarthak.
before we go on, let me just introduce Ishan in brief. So Ishan is a fifth year law student from NLIU Bhopal. He is also a co-convener at the uh, Commercial and Business Law Society, and also he's an upcoming associate at Khaitan and Co. This year. Beside that, Ishan, this would be a fanboy moment, but I have been knowing you like for like past 2 years. So the first time I heard you was in Stetson final rounds. So I know you like I had been
Oh,
following you since then,
you were
and
there?
yeah. So yeah, I was there in the Stetson final rounds, and I heard you. So any speaker that I've heard, like, let me ask, like, you as to when I heard you, it was like after Manya Oberoi, you were the second speaker that actually persuaded everyone in the room. So I think if guys have followed Stetson, they would know Sikar Manyar and Manya Oberoi for sure. And then it's always Ishan Chopra that comes into play. So Ishan, like in brief, let me allow you to speak. So in
Like
brief, let
this,
us know as to how was your experience in Stetson.
yeah, to start with, no, that's a very humbling introduction. Thanks a lot, Sarthak. Thank you to ASTM Legal for like organizing this. And I was just going through my LinkedIn. These guys are also coming up with a project mooting, and they're fantastic people coming over. So whoever is here who wants to register for that, please do that. And to start with my experiences, let's just start right from where Sarthak mentioned. Not many people know this, but Stetson was actually my first moot as a speaker. And prior to that, given that when I did Jessup, I was back like in my second year. Second year generally don't do Jessup as speaker. So I was a researcher back then, and I kind of had a phobia for like speaking. I did not consider speaking one of my strengths. So no, there are people out there who at times think that we haven't spoken till our third year. We can't really go forward with speaking now. So the thing is, if you have the right set of coaches, if you have the right amount of motivation, it can be done. And coming to my experiences, so I did the first moot I did in college was Ragnul criminal law moot, and I was like semi-finalist there. Post that, I did Noal's maritime arbitration, which was like a good experience overall. It introduced me to the nuances of international law mooting. And post that, I got Jessup through the international pools, and that was where the entire the experience of mooting absolutely transformed. Jessup is a very, very intensive exercise, and I personally feel it's way more intensive than Stetson. The amount of preparation it requires in terms of the basic prep, in terms of researching on themes beforehand, is very extensive. But Stetson does have its own set of difficulties. The amount of policy level questioning that is there in Stetson, I personally did not find that in Jessup. Stetson is more about demeanor than about law at times. It's more about pure persuasion. Uh, uh, in fact, more importantly, even in the international rounds, the time, in most of the Indian moods, we are told that already you can ask for an extra minute, you can ask for extra 2-3 minutes. But with Setson, even if you ask for an extra minute during the international round, there was a straightforward points deduction. So it was very, very important to like stick to those timelines, and that's something. Coming to Shikhar and Manya, they were actually my coaches for the international rounds. And Shekhar and I met he was doing Jessup when I was doing Jessup. So we met in Washington, and he's actually a good friend of mine. So, yeah, and about me, as Sarthik said, I'm currently the co-convener at Center for Business and Commercial Laws. I'll be joining banking and finance team at Khaitan and Company from July this year.
Okay, Ishan. So, like, before we go more about the specifics of mooting or the basics of Stetson and Jessup, let me just ask you, like, we all have come across this dilemma of prioritizing between academics, debates, research papers, and then, of course, moot courts. What is your take on the same as to how can we prioritize and what other things that we need to prioritize? Now that you're graduating, I think you're the best person to actually guide these audience.
So, guys, I think the harsh truth in the Indian education system is that classroom teaching is not very effective. If you go to like foreign law schools, they have proper Socratic method of teaching where there is very extensive discussion. You have to do your readings in advance. That's why if you look all over the internet, law schools are very hyped about law school ja rahe hain. Like the level of work that is associated with law schools is huge. But somehow Indian system has not been able to do that. That's why I think here the best way to learn is to participate in all sorts of extracurricular activities. And everyone uh, has their different tastes over here. So I can't say that prioritize mooting or prioritize research paper writing or even debates. Debates is something which is rapidly growing, and even when you sit for recruitments, law firms do recognize if you have participated in good debates. And as far as balancing the entire thing is concerned, I think the earlier you recognize that it is the extracurricular activities which are actually teaching you the nuances of being a good lawyer. Now, consider mooting. You look at a statement of facts, you research on it extensively, you read each and every line 100 times, you draw your own arguments, you write them out, you practice them in front of the mirror, you present them in front of a proper professional bench. This is what law is about. I think it's like classroom teaching is never you will never be able to get you that experience. And to balance all this with academics, personally, I've always felt that academic pressure is not that much in Indian law schools. I'm sure none of us like studies more than a week in advance or like 10 days in advance, right? And even if you are studying regularly, which is actually a great habit, even then I think 24 days 24 hours is enough. You can always like break down your calendar. But like for example, consider Jessup is an year long move. It takes a year. So you need to have this in your head before even starting, let's say fourth year, before even starting the fourth year, that I want to do Jessup in my fourth year, and you plan everything accordingly. The thing is, when you will go for an international pool selections, you might or might not get Jessup. But if you aim for the best, you might just end up getting, let's say, a Stetson or an Ox IP or an Ox Prize. And then your year will revolve around that. So every year, take one big thing. For example, in my fifth year, I did not moot. I wanted to go for an international publication, right? So I made sure that my year revolved around that. Similarly, during my third year, I made sure that my year revolved around Stetson. Everything like kind of falls in place if you are sure that this is what you want by the end of this year. So that is how I have always like structured my year. One main thing and everything is subsidiary to it.
Well, since you talked about an year-long moot, like we also know that these international moot courts preferably they require like tedious preparation, like 6 to 11 month long preparation, and it usually end up consuming all your time, which you may have used for like you said for an international publication or a national publication or internships. Like who does not fancy internships at tier 1 or tier 2 firms? So, what do you have to say about the conflicting nature of moot courts, and how should one balance or manage their internships or their other priorities alongside moot courts?
Sure. So that is actually a very tricky question because as far as internships are concerned, thing is that there are not many slots, and whatever the law firms give us, we actually have to take that. And if you're doing, let's say, a Jessup or a Stetson or a Wiz, the submissions might just be around that vacation time in which you are interning. So when I was doing Stetson, so I think this also has to be looked at mood wise. And this again goes, this again follows from the thing that which I said previously, that when you have aimed for a mood, try and schedule your calendar around that. So traditionally, uh, Stetson submissions are in November, right? And for example, when I am not aware of, no, of course, everyone's vacation schedule, but for Stetson, my submissions were in November. I knew that by November, I even had my national rounds in November. So I knew by January I'll be free. So I can apply for January internships. But for Jessup, that was during my second year end. I knew that I'll have my submissions during January, so I did not apply for an internship. So that's a trade-off you'll anyway have to make. I think if you have a submission, like, and I don't think it's like, I won't suggest interning during that month, because even if you intern, your teammates might have an issue with that. And frankly speaking, the kind of work that goes in on, like, during the 11th hour is a lot. Footnoting, making of bibliography, making sure everything is proofread twice, making sure the cover page is perfect, making sure the footnote is consistent throughout the draft. It takes a lot of time. And internships might just not go well with your teammates also, especially if they are not doing it. If the whole team decides to intern, that's a different ball game. You can always just say that, all right, I'll intern later, or we'll all intern for 6 hours and then we'll get back to work.
Yeah, I think yes, it's about prioritizing things, but like you said, it's very difficult to answer such questions when it comes to different people. Like some people love debates a lot, some people love mood courts a lot. So it depends on uh, what hits you do when you enter into law school. Well, that brings me to another part of this session, that uh, moot courts just does not limit you to international law moot courts. Then there are national law moot courts, and then there are arbitration moot courts. How different are like is preparation for each set of this moot court? Do you think that we need different kind of skill set to go for every moot, like be it a national moot or an international moot or an arbitration moot?
Absolutely. Like, each of the moods you just mentioned, they're different ball games altogether. Even within the specific subsets of PIL, both Jessup and Stetson are completely different. Manfred Lax is completely different. ICC is absolutely different. There is no parallel. And then if you go on the arbitration side, FDI, Viz, ELSA, they have completely different set of demeanor which is expected in front of a panel. They have a completely different set of argument, the way of argument presentation in the memorial which is expected out of you. And national moods, of course, the amount of the submissiveness that you have to show to the judge is a lot. The demeanor, of course, changes. Then the way in which you're presenting your arguments, it is respectfully submitted, that is repeated again and again and again. There is generally a lot of importance of precedence there, which is not there in international law mooting or arbitration mooting. So yeah, they're all very, very different. And I think it, although it's like catching up in India, now we need a very, very good set of coaches for you, like for each team actually. So I think coaching system is something which can help you adapt to each of these different styles of moves. And this is the first decision which a team should make the moment it is formed. Look for a coach.
Okay. So since we are talking all about oral submissions, let's just directly dive into it, and let me just get started with the questions. Like like you said, you started as a researcher at Jessup, and then you went on being the first time as a speaker in the Stetson India rounds, and then you became the best speaker in India rounds as well as the global rounds of 23rd Stetson. So tell us your way of going about as a speaker from a researcher. Anything that you would like to add upon?
Sure. So I think that at some level, I don't know why this role of researcher is stigmatized in India. Like if you go for international moods, like university like Singapore Management University, National University of Singapore, they have two speakers and they have an army of researchers. They're like 17, 19 researchers, which have made like the entire team has made two memos. And no, each of them is selected through a very rigorous procedure, and all of them are very well respected and appreciated. This is like unlike Indian scenario. Somehow we only think that speaker is their team. Probably some elitism is associated with that post of speaker. But no, my seniors, like the moment I got allotted Jessup, they told me that just go for it. If you are into Jessup, you would know Shagnik Das. Shagnik Das is a graduate from NLU Jodhpur, and he took my oral rounds. He also checked the researchers' tests and all. And he told me, if you're getting Jessup, go for it as a researcher. And that was probably the best decision I made in my law school. Generally, the thing with Jessup is that senior students in the college do it. So you get to work with seniors. That's point one. I think earlier, as you are progressing, like through the 5 years of your law school, or like the 3 years of your law school, as the case may be, I think before directly diving into a big time mooting speaking position, you should always try and develop your fundamentals. For me, those fundamentals started developing during the Nual's moot, where I was first time introduced to international law. And then during Jessup, of course, my seniors who had done ICC and Ox Prize before that, my teammates, they also helped me polish those basics and learn more about it. And of course, like as a researcher, I think given that you don't have the pressure of speaking, the amount of reading you get to do is huge. As a speaker, you probably would think about, all right, I need to speak this to convince the person. But as a researcher, you like have a bouquet of options. Okay, which argument will look good, A, B, C, or D. You'll check the authorities, you'll make sure you're reading everything that there is on the topic. You will go through books just to solve a sub issue. So uh, that's the level of exposure you get if you are a good researcher with a good team. And when it comes to the speaker thing side of the things, I think like things change, but the change is not that. But I think even as a researcher, if you're internalizing your argument, and this is something which I've told all my juniors, by internalizing I mean you're convinced with what your argument is. No, as Sarthak said, that he told me that he thought that I was able to convince the judges that were sitting in front of me. That was because I was very convinced with my argument myself. I have told that argument to myself looking in the mirror so many times that I thought there is no better argument out there. So I think that's how you develop the confidence to put it forward. It's not only the argument at times, it's also the conviction with which you're putting it forward, which impacts the judges or the person in front of you. So this point about internalizing, and this internalizing of arguments comes solely from giving it time. I don't think anything can take away the you know the amount of time that you need to give into crafting these arguments and preparing yourself for like presentation. I remember like both during my second and third year, I did not go home for Diwali because I had these rounds which were going on constantly. The entire team also was not going. So and looking back, it's just it's like a great memory that we all worked really hard for this.
Yes. So since you talked about the crafting of speech, so let me just ask you, how do you start your preparation for oral rounds? Like the preferred speech format, or anything that you would like your audience to know as to how to go about initially for a speech preparation?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Sarthak. So I think a common mistake that people often do is that they start with the memo when they're making the arguments. Now try to understand that memos have word limits, and especially like both Jessup and Stetson have very strict word limits. And when you're drafting the arguments, you have to like cull out only the important points. And what convinces you when you are reading something is very different from what convinces you when you're listening to something. So you might not be very convinced when I just read out the memo, although that's the best form of presenting it. But you need to understand when you are speaking the importance of you know articulating state practice. That is one thing I'm going to repeat throughout this webinar: importance of state practice. Secondly, the importance of parallelisms. This parallelisms thing is something which I have not seen much in Indian mooting, although like during international rounds many people use this strategy. It's basically drawing a parallel between your facts and a similar state practice or cases. This is the best way to convince an international law moot judge. Given that nothing is binding, a similar situation is what should be done, given that it has been done before and no one objected to it. So this is like the standard way to convince all international law mooting judges. So always keep that in head when you start with the start with the speech. And as far as the steps are concerned, as I said, don't go with the memo. Just give yourself a couple of days. I personally don't like to type, so I used to like write down stuff. What would I say to myself that I'm convinced that this is right? If your argument satisfies this line of questioning, then jot it down. Idea is to convince yourself before like convincing anyone else.
Well, if we see the India rounds of a moot and then we see an international round, like the way you said, to convince yourself, it takes a hard piece of job to convince an Indian judge as compared to an international judge. So how do you see it? Like, should one prepare differently for globals and for India rounds, or should it be like more balanced toward both the rounds?
So I think we should of course take everything as it comes. Excuse me. The first thing that you have to manage is the national round, right? So that's where all the focus should be, like for starters. And when you go for an international for the national rounds, you need to recognize that most of the judges that you're going to face are going to be high court advocates. They're going to be district court advocates, law firm practitioners who have done moots before, and they might not even have read the entire problem. They might just have attended the briefing, right? So they might not go into specifics, but they're going to check your basics, and they're going to grill you on basics very, very hard, and they're going to grill you on very basic logical reasoning throughout the problems. They will not go into complex questions of law unless and until they're very well read with the problem, which can also happen, and it happens during quarterfinals, which are generally the knockout rounds. Judges are very, very, very well read, but during the prelims round, it's the basics which gets you through. For example, in Stetson, uh, you need to know, you need to like be very thorough with Boyle, which is like an author on international environmental law. For transboundary harm, also there are many basics. You need to know all the judgments which are there: pulp mills judgment, um, construction of roads cases. All these things need to be on your tips if you want to get through the prelims. And comparing them to international rounds, in international rounds, the hard law aspects, or the authorities who are giving, they do matter, but their weightage slightly decreases, because given that you're competing with best teams across the world, all of them have those authorities. What matters is how you're presenting it, your eloquence, uh and as I said earlier, for Stetson, the time limits are very crucial for Stetson. For Jessup, of course, gauging the bench also is very important during international rounds. It might not be during national rounds. That is, if you're sensing that, all right, this judge wants me to argue precautionary because he has been saying scientific uncertainty again and again and again, just go for like precautionary, skip the transboundary arm argument that you might have.
So, like you talked about the role of state practices and the parallelism that you talked about. So, is it like is it effective in India rounds, or is it effective in just the world rounds, where someone who is well read with the problem in and out, someone who knows the basic of the problem as to how and why it has been drafted? So is it like very conclusive, or is it like very submissive that we go on to plead the way we want with the state practice in parallelism?
No, I think it works during national rounds as well. And you know why it works is because it just shows the level of like the hard work you have put in. Because it takes a substantial amount of time to come across that perfect case law or that perfect instance of state practice where you know that all right, I can use this, I can mold this in a manner that I'm able to support my argument. So if you're able to do that, for like personally, for me, it did work during national rounds as well. And in fact, I like to share my speech also, which I used during nationals and internationals.
Sure, sure.
All right, just give me 1 minute. Sure. Is the screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just jump to the parallelism part first. 1 minute. Like not the most cleanest of footnote, no, not the most cleanest of speaker notes, guys, but this is how I had it during the rounds. Yeah, here. Okay, so you, for example, this year in Stetson, you have like the problem concerns bats, right? So you have bats which are being affected by windmills. So you, let's just say you find a perfect instance of state practice where a similar thing has happened and the states reacted in a manner which support your side. So this is how you'll go about it. You know, a similar situation arose in front of, a similar situation arose uh, in the instance concerning dash 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 species which were affected by the windmills. Uh, put out like over here, what I did was, in my case, there were two instruments which were the competing sources of jurisdiction. One was more specific and one was more general. I found this case law where there were two competing instruments. One was general, one was more specific, and I drew parallels between them. CBD equals Palestinian Mandate, Protocol 12 of Treaty of Lausanne equals CMS. And then I applied the reasoning with PCIJ used for these two instruments on CBD and CMS. And then I reached this conclusion. In my experience, this is the best way to drive home any point in a very technical issue. So jurisdiction is generally very technical. I think we have it in JASAB also this year, concerning like reservations to jurisdiction under 36(2). And there are many cases in which such parallelisms can be used. So like you still have time till JASAB, and if anyone's doing it, this can be done. All right. Now I'll come specifically to the state practice part, which Sarthak talked about. State practice is the single most important thing which differentiates a national moot from an international moot. The thing is that there is, I personally am not, I love international law mooting. I'm not a huge fan of international law. Why? Because you, there is no law per se. International law is what states do. Majority of it, given like in, it's at least in the mood problems that we have, is governed by customs. And one of the most important issues that you have in this problem is that you have to establish customs. How do you establish those customs? You establish those customs using state practice. And see me 1 minute. State practice. Yep, here. So in this issue, I had to establish that some act is attributable under Article 5 of RCEVA, right? So Generally for attribution issues, I think there is one in JESUP also this year. Generally for attribution issues, you go into the RCEVA commentary by James Crawford and you try to look into all the case laws that are given there. You of course try to draw parallels that are there. But a better way to do is to dig for state practice. That is, try and find similar instances that have which have happened in the past and use them. The thing is that a state practice might not always convey the entire picture. It's like using a line from the paragraph in judgment, but not the whole paragraph. But the beauty of state practice is that no one will ask you the entire facts or the judgment because there is no judgment. You, as an advocate, have an ability to present the state practice in a manner which supports your side. And this is what happens in the International Court of Justice as well. Because generally these instances of state practice are so complex that, and they have so many dimensions to them that you can use them from both the sides. For example, the Southern Bluefin Tuna case. You go in front of any tribunal that is arguing jurisdiction, both the sides rely on the same paragraph because it's so complex that international law basically allows you such things. And yep, that's it, like on the state practice, and that's it. Sarthak, any more specific questions, or like should I go forward with speech structuring?
Yeah, just one more question before you go ahead with the speech structure.
Okay.
Since you talked about hard law and soft law, basically, and you talked about, since hard law is almost with everyone when we come into global rounds, like everybody knows what treaty, what provision to apply, what are the things that we can go about for, what even customary international law is like something that is well known to everyone. Like everybody knows what is precautionary principle, what is duty to cooperate. So everybody is well aware of these things. But let's say, for example, this year's JESUP concerns more of soft law. For example, international health regulation, the constitution of World Health Organizations. So how do you see that? How difficult is it to establish a soft law practice with, like, in front of the judges as compared to hard law? And how do we go about it? Is it like just the parallelism and state practices are enough to, like, make one understand that soft law suffices everything, or is there any different approach to go for a soft law?
All right. So see, I think first of all, we need to understand, for example, let's consider international health regulations. What are international health regulations? There are a set of guidelines which were passed by the WHO General Assembly. Excuse me. There are passed, so there are a set of guidelines which have been passed by WHO members, right? Now, whenever you are looking at a soft law instrument, it's like a basic of international law that even though they might not be custom, they are what you call as, one second, they are an evidence of custom at times, even if they're not custom. For example, consider General Assembly resolution which has not been passed unanimously. Although it might not be custom, for example, resolution 1379, although it's some people say it's customary, some people say it's not, but it's unanimous that it reflects some level of unanimity among the members of the United Nations, right? So this is how you use soft law instruments. You use them in consonance with the hard law instruments. And a very good guide on this is the ILC's report on formation of custom. It's a 4-part report. And if anyone has time, and of course, if you're doing international mooting, it's an absolute essential. You have to go through it. It actually discusses how a soft law instrument amasses the power of an hard law instrument, or in which instances do soft law instruments get argumentative power in front of tribunals and courts. And a very good authority for this is the whaling case between Japan and Australia and New Zealand, I think, where I think in paragraph 38 and 39 they've discussed when do the regulations of International Commission for Whaling become binding on Japan. So this is a parallel which you can always apply to international health regulations as well, or let's say a CMS resolution or a CBD resolution as well. Or I think in this year's Stetson problem, you have some specific convention on bats to those resolutions as well. This type of reasoning can apply, and the source for and the treaty source for such establishing such soft law arguments is subsequent agreements under the Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties, that is Article 31(3)(a). When does a soft law instrument becomes a subsequent agreement? The moment it becomes a subsequent agreement, it is on par of a treaty. But the threshold for establishing subsequent agreement is very high. Generally, it is that it has been passed unanimously, which is very rare. But you'll be amused to know that in most of the cases, all the resolutions that you have for Stetson have been passed unanimously. So they do have the value of a subsequent agreement, and this is because these states really don't care what happens to a bat or an eel. They just go for it. Like, they don't want to look bad, so they just approve it. But ultimately, the consequences can be that they can be internationally responsible for its breach.
I think that answers the question. If you could go on with the structurization of speech, please.
All right, thank you, Sarthak. So, okay, this is the basic introduction that your speech should always have. As a first speaker, you have the onus to introduce yourself, your state which you are representing, the time allocation between you and the second speaker. Also, if there are rebuttals and sub-rebuttals, the amount of time that you're reserving for that from the total allocation. This is the second part. I've written something. Yeah. So whenever you're starting a speech, like from respondents and applicants, what I often find is like even like teams in my college, junior teams, what they do is they give the same set of introduction for facts for respondents and the applicants. The thing is, when you're setting the tone for your argument, you need to sound correct. That is, cherry pick the facts. You don't need to tell the judge the entire story. Use the facts which are in your favor. Present a very good, rosy picture of your side of the case, even though it might be very difficult to establish. So in this case, what these people had done was this is respondent, right? Yeah. Yeah. So what these people wanted to establish was that the other side's harvesting project, where they were using some seaweeds for generation of renewable energy, was harming the system, was harming the ecosystem, and is in violation of international law. So I've again and again emphasized how important those eels are, how ecologically sensitive that area is. Yeah, and I've also mentioned how we have tried to ask them to help us, but they're not, which prima facie establishes non-cooperation on their part. So it's very important for you to start with a narrative. Like, try to keep it short, given that time is a huge issue in these moves. When we come to demarcation of issues, the thing is, Jessup has 4 issues, which is very tough to handle for one. Like 2 issues, one speaker is very tough. Stetson, on the other hand, has 2 issues, but again, they're also big and like generally bifurcated into 2 to 4 sub issues. So, as the first speaker, in fact, like I think this applies for the second speaker as well. Try to make your speech as structured as possible. Your speech should be like a roadmap, which is clear in front of the judge. Again and again, make sure that the judge is with you on the argument. If you're just going on, and you're very happy with your speech, that बढ़िया कोई question नहीं पूछ रहा है, I'm speaking so well, that doesn't mean you're speaking well. That means the judge has lost you. Judge is not following. Judges which are generally there will always, who are following you, will always ask questions. That is why more questions is a sign that your speech is being followed. And it is actually very tough, because given that they're not very well prepared, like on the law as well as the facts, it's very tough to keep the judge with you. And this is the toughest role you have as a speaker. Make sure that you draw out that I'll speak this first, then I'll speak this. To start with, I'll start with this. When I'm starting with this, what do I do? Like when I come to the first prong of an argument, people start with case law that time. So simply say, Your Excellencies, this was said in this case law, this was said in this case law. And this comes via their national mooting experience. This is not how you go about international law mooting though. What you need to do is, again, try and follow the 38(1) structure under the ICJ statute. This convention, custom, general principle of international law, and subsidiary sources of international law. If you have 4 things, and this is, remember, whatever I'm speaking for the applicant right now. Respondent has a different set of procedures which should be followed. Go for the treaty argument first. It's 38(1)(a). It's established. You don't need to spend much time establishing the custom. That is exactly what I'm doing. Of course, this is a jurisdiction issue, so that's like slightly different. But again, I'm starting with drawing out the treaty law over here. When I've drawn out the treaty law, then I come on to the authorities, where I extend an interpretation which helps me. So under 27(3), CBD, ICJ has jurisdiction when there is a dispute between the parties. What is a dispute? Dispute happens when both parties have opposing views regarding performance or non-performance. This was held in ABCD case. In the present case, applicant and respondent have opposing views on performance or non-performance on these issues, and hence there is a dispute under CBD. That's it. Like, that completes your argument. Then when you're done with this, you come to the custom part. And whenever you are arguing customs, make sure that you have like 3-4 instances of state practice on tips. If they ask you how it's a custom, it might not be actually a custom. But even if you give like 3 instances, you might be able to run your argument. So always have that. And I think this is why, like, a good mooter is not always necessarily a very good advocate. You might not be telling the truth always. Not that you're misleading the court, but proceedings in the International Court of Justice goes on for weeks to establish a custom. You have 2 minutes. So you do what you can. You use the instances that are there and you establish the custom and move on. Yep. Another important point. Having spent 4 to 5 months on a problem, what the respondent is going to speak as an applicant, right? So always preempt arguments in your speech itself. That Your Excellencies, as has been said on respondent's memorial page, this number, it has been argued that, however, Your Excellencies, if I were to draw your attention to page number this of this blah 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 case or report, the respondent's arguments stand refuted or something on these lines. So always try to preempt, like even as a respondent. And whenever you're drafting your speech, try and draft your speech in such a way that those like your speech should lead the judge to certain questions whose answers like your speech should be deliberately vague at places, so that it's basically you're inviting a question which you're going to answer so perfectly well because you know what the question is going to be and you've prepared for it in advance. So try and keep some things deliberately vague at places. And at times just stop, because judge is going to ask for state practice and then like shower them with state practice. So that is where your like bench reading comes into play. And for that, you need to give a lot of practice rounds. Give rounds to as many people as possible, please. Uh, Here, this I've written about the soft law instruments. First, that's in soft law instruments are actually the main source of law you have at times. So that argument about why they are binding, which I told you about from whaling case between Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. It's absolutely essential. You should know that. And for state practice, at times it's very important that you go through all the conference of parties, the technical committee reports. You go through the secretariat comments, because from there you might just be able to get some things which support your side. I'll give you a good example about this. Wait. Uh, Here, this thing. I've written something about how excising of jurisdiction under CBD will not affect jurisdiction under UNCLOS. And this was not the law. This is one random comment that the United States gave at a place, and like a couple of United States allies supported this. But it was helping the applicant, right? And I relied upon this to accentuate upon my point of the argument. So the more more you comb through the preparatory materials, the better the standard of your arguments get. The more precise you are able to point out that, all right, whatever I'm speaking, your excellencies, this can be found on page number 3 of the third technical commission's dialogue on the drafting of CBD. Things like this, especially during national rounds, sound very, very fancy, and they get you the points. So let's keep this in mind. It takes a lot of hard work, but it's worth it. Like that one line in those 50 pages can really embellish your argument. And from the respondent side, I think I only have one thing to add. Make sure you are using a rebuttalist style. That is, the burden on applicant is to come and set the tone. I always prefer being an applicant during the round, because I get to choose the arguments which will be discussed during the entire round. As a respondent, my burden is to refute what applicant said. So it can be tougher, actually. So as a respondent, never, for example, this year you have, let's say in Jessup, you have an argument on anticipatory self-defense. Excuse me. On anticipatory self-defense. So if the applicant is using anticipatory self-defense and they are not arguing under Article 51, although both of them are intimately connected, you might have separate arguments for that. Then don't start with 51 as a respondent. Jump right to the point and tell the court of why thresholds for anticipatory self-defense are not met. Now, apologies, my throat is actually acting up a little bit, so that's it, Sarthak, I think from my side on the speech structuring part.
I guess that answers a lot of questions that everybody would have had, being in the last stage of their rounds. I think 1 week, tomorrow, I think it's Stetson India rounds, and then we'll be soon having the Jessup India rounds. So it's like everybody is almost all there at their toes. And I think giving a guidance how to structurize their speech, they would surely reconsider and go back. They would surely try to make and amend changes as you have suggested. But I think this, yes.
I'm just saying, I hope so, and I would actually love to know the more about the audience also today. How many of us are actually participating? How many of us are beginners? What's the scene?
Sure. We'll come to that, and let me just wind it up because we are
Sure.
already on a time crunch. Just a last question that I would preferably want to ask you, like, what you participated in was a physical round where you go, where you had the experience and exposure of looking at the judge upfront and know how whether he is convinced or not. Like now that we have been hit by a pandemic and everything has gone on to virtual mode. So how do you think it would affect the oral rounds, and what should be the best approach for the oral submissions virtually? Like what would you suggest?
So it's actually I am not a huge fan of virtual rounds, frankly. I don't think they're able to test you as a motor. I don't think they give you the same experience. So it's like a big letdown. But given that this is the unfortunate situation we are in, try and give more and more rounds, like on the exact platform that you are going to be using for the rounds. For example, I think for Satsan, Zoom is being used. So give rounds on Zoom again and again. Don't use Google Meet. At some level, I think that helps you familiarize yourself with the platform more, and you can expect know in what sort of frames the judges will be coming. That's the first thing. Secondly, be double sure on the internet connectivity part. If you can, make sure you have someone around who's like sitting there with a hotspot in case your internet acts up. Thirdly, like here you can't really gauge a person through like online interaction. It's not possible, and I think this is why, although it's like a very controversial thing, at times people say that not so good people are also at times able to pull off things during virtual rounds. It's not the good means of selecting people. And I have had a lot of frustrated juniors who have been like saying things like this. But I feel that it is like a separate art in itself, given the increasing use of video call, which is not going away any soon. We need to learn how to express ourselves equally effectively and convincingly through this means as well. So just just make sure, I think you can always listen to yourself, record yourself on Zoom while speaking, see how it's coming on the other side. uh Probably like give more and more rounds to other people. Yeah, that's it from my side, Sarthak.
Sure. So we'll open the floor for the audience, and if there is someone who's participating, and if he or she still has a question, or someone who is a beginner, surely go ahead and shoot your question. Just raise your hand, and we'll unmute you and we'll allow you to ask your questions. Just in case if you have any questions, you can surely ask. If not, then we can go ahead. I see no hands. I think you have almost answered everything that one could have thought of while coming to this session.
Or
I
people have
believe like
slept.
they, no, not club. Uh, I think Amisha has a question. Moini, if you can unmute Amisha. Yeah. See, the people have not slept. They are asking the question in the chat box.
Fantastic. So Divyanshi, I think I'll go with Divyanshi's first. Amisha, you can write in the chat box. I think that's great. I think after Amisha's, we can go with Labas Farouk.
Yeah,
Apologies if
sure.
I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. All right. So if we have to state the facts, then how much time should we take? See, there is no hard and fast rule as to the amount of time you should take, but I don't feel you should like exceed a minute. Like minute on the upper side, not more than that. Given that you're just starting your speech, you don't want to panic at the very beginning about, do I only have this much time left? The entire introduction, including the introduction of issues, should finish within 1.5 minutes.
If I could add is trying to ask, like, since we have two different speakers in our rounds, uh, so do you think that every speaker should have their narrative for their particular issues?
No. I think this is only the first speaker's onus. Go there, give a very rosy picture of your case. And for the second speaker, I think it's your duty to set a platform for the second speaker so that that person can come and build upon it. So that's why when you give the brief introduction of facts, don't think on the lines that all right, I'm only giving it for my facts which are relevant to my issue. Give a holistic overall view.
Okay, we'll go with Amisha's question. Amisha, would you like to unmute yourself?
She's saying she can't though.
Okay, so her question is, I am a beginner. I do not know much about moot court competitions yet. Can you tell me where to start from?
So I think first thing which no, I think I actually forgot to mention it also. If you're preparing for Jessup or any international law moot, go and buy the Jessup final round videos that are available there. You can actually buy them. And for Indian mooters, I think the standard is Mr. Rag Yadava. He, NLS won Jessup back in 2013, and there's a video of them arguing against SMU back in 2013 or 12. The name of the problem was the case concerning Alphonan migrants, where certain migrants were, where some island drowned due to climate change and people were forced to another island. So like start there, see how he's arguing, see his demeanor. That's like the top, like the best level that you can reach probably in mooting.
Okay, I think hope it answered Amisha. So we'll move to Laiba. Laiba, if you can unmute Laiba, Mohini.
I've sent
Hello,
her
sir.
the request.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Sir, I'm in my first year and I would like to know that should I start mooting in my first year only or should I just focus on my academics right now?
No, go for mooting, definitely moot. I think mooting will teach you way more than whatever you will learn in a semester. Pick up a good, like don't go for a very complex, like I see people picking up IBC moots in their first semester and all. It is not recommended. Please just go for something very basic, a good national moot, a good criminal law moot, even something, even like international law. People, I think people make a big deal of international law. It's actually not very difficult. Just like stick with the basics, understand things. And of course, like this, I think this is something which I want to tell everyone: do not make big deal of something only because people say it's tough at times. Everything is pretty achievable if you like just put in some time. Thereby, I hope I have answered your question.
Mohini, can you unmute her?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Welcome.
So I think it's the last question is there. It's from Komal. So I'll just tell you, she's trying to ask that since you talked about your fear of going as a speaker, even she believes that she is not able to cope with it. So what is your suggestion about it?
Yes, I understand that. No, if you have not spoken at times, and there are a lot of ugly things in college also, like being team formation, you're not being made the speaker. People might not trust your abilities. That makes you think you're not also good enough at times. All this can happen, but at some level, I think it's something which everyone can do, right? We all know how to speak. We all know how to communicate our ideas. Only difficulty we all have at times is that we are not very, let's just say, fluent with English language in front of the judges, or we're not very mm, on the point. I think it's very difficult as a mooter to stay on the point. People tend to speak left, right, and center, but they never hit the point. These are the only two things that you need to know as a speaker. And the day you realize that if you every day just read something from a book, take a book like or like even a newspaper article, read it out in a very calm composed manner in front of a mirror every day for a month, for 2 months. After 3 months, you'll realize the way you used to speak has changed. In general life also, try to speak slowly. When you're explaining something to someone, like talk in English with your friends more. Explain things very, very slowly to them. You like gradually it'll just become an habit. It'll become a habit. It's not a big thing, and it's like an issue of confidence only. People who think they cannot speak, it's an issue with confidence. It's not an issue of abilities.
I think that answers all the questions, and we'll surely like to thank Ishan for taking time out to take such an informative session. Ishan, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank
Thank
you
you,
so much
Sarthak.
for answering all the questions that our audience had and we had. I think we have a lot of takeaways from this session, and we will surely amend it. Like we'll surely apply it in our learnings from here on. Thank you so much for joining us, Ishan.
Thank you,
Okay.
Sarthak.